Hey guys, this is going to be another low poly tutorial, this time focusing on quadrupeds. It's going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be narrating how I did the 2D illustration, and this will also be my first animal low poly tutorial. I don't make a huge amount of animals, but it's a really popular request, so I thought I would show you guys how I would do it. I chose Arcanine because I love him. I love tigers and I love lions, and Arcanine kind of reminds me of both of those. I always have an Arcanine when I play Pokemon because he's great. Anyway, so when you follow this illustration and this series, keep in mind that Arcanine is more of a dog-lion kind of shape. He can be modified into foxes or what have you. So I hope you guys find this tutorial interesting at least. So if I was going to describe my illustration process, I always start off looking at the skeleton of an animal I don't really understand. I draw dogs and cats occasionally, but not often enough to really understand what's going on, so I always have some kind of reference open of the spinal structure, especially if you're going to be animating and rigging. So after you understand the anatomy of your animal, you want to kind of think about the style or the feeling you want to get. For me, I kind of wanted a loose, happy kind of illustration sketch. I work with a lot of really gestural lines to help me both visualize the shape of the creature, but also to make the illustration itself feel more alive. I have a hard time visualizing anything really just out of thin air, so I have to make a lot of lines and sketches to visualize it and help me visualize it. And I think that having a lot of sketchy lines can help you if those sketchy lines kind of work with your shapes and your forms. Yeah, they should really help you build up forms as opposed to distracting you from the main shapes. That's another thing I really think about when I'm making illustrations, are the main shapes and the silhouette of the creature. Like for me, when I was making the mane, I was really thinking like, oh, I want it to be relatively round, I want it to poof here, I want it to read a very particular way. It wasn't just me randomly creating strokes and being like, oh, that looks good. It's more like, what is the overall shape that I want? I do the same thing with the legs, and I do the same thing with the body. I try and think very carefully about exactly what shape I'm trying to get here. With the tail, it was mostly just a round shape. With the body, it was mostly just a cylinder. Just focus very strongly on your shape language, and you will create a very unique and interesting character. Some of the things you can do that are just technique-wise you've probably heard before. You can flip the canvas to check proportions. I do that pretty often. You should do it earlier than I did so that you don't have to change a whole bunch in the future. Another thing I find really helpful is to make sure that your character feels balanced, that their legs and their arms or anything that's touching the ground feels like it's very firmly rooted in the ground. It will give your character a lot of weight, and it makes them feel like they're actually standing in this environment. Another thing is I was struggling to understand how a lion's anatomy works from the front, so I never hesitate to look up references whenever I'm confused. Now the interesting thing about this lion's anatomy is that its bones kind of curve inwards and then curve outwards, and I did not know that. The thing with bones and just limbs in general is you want to make sure that you give some kind of curve to them, but it's got to be the curve in the right direction. And you can see that a lot with the lion's bones. They're not so straight and angular, they're actually more like a gentle curve, kind of like almost the way my line quality is. So it's basically just the same. I'm trying to keep kind of this loose gestural feeling going through the image. I'm actually going to flip and duplicate both sides of the line. That's not something I usually do except with 3D modeling, because I will be mirroring this model when I go to create it, and it will create a lot of confusion when I start to model. Here I'm just checking the distances between specifically the face, the nose, the eyes, to make sure that when I'm modeling the main pose that everything matches up, so I don't have to struggle and fix things with a bad reference. You want to make sure your reference is very, very accurate before you start any low poly model, because if it's not, it'll just waste a lot of your time, believe me. And here, you really want to understand the shape of every form on your object, because you're going to be making this in a 3D space, and if you can't picture it in a 3D space now, you will struggle to do that later. For me, I'm thinking, oh, the eyes are going to be a roundish object that's kind of buried in the face, and it's going to be facing forwards. I think of the muzzle as sort of this cylindrical shape that's going to be protruding. The ears are going to be kind of a flat, plate-like shape, and the fur is going to be like the inside of a pillow, kind of round. That's another reason why at the beginning I focused so strongly on shape language, because when you're creating low poly, shape language is everything. The silhouette is super important, and the more clearly defined your silhouette is, the better low poly your model will be. I even think that mine might be a little bit too detailed for low poly, but we'll see what happens. I really like floofy floofs, that's why I like Arcanine, and I'm going to try and make it as good as I can. Here I'm just adding some stripes. Not exactly the same as Arcanine. I was trying to reconcile the difference between an actual tiger's stripes and how Arcanine's stripes kind of look. This particular illustration was interesting because I couldn't decide if I wanted a lion, a tiger, or I wanted some kind of dog, so I kind of did a weird fusion. I kind of like it though. He looks like a good boy. He looks happy. And here I'm just when I color, I kind of splotch color around. I don't really care so much about keeping it in the lines. It's more about color for me. I like the freedom that just kind of throwing paint on gives me. I use a lightly textured brush because I kind of like how that feels, and then I kind of splotch on some more color, get some interest. And then when I'm done with that, I just cut all of the dirty parts away. Especially with the not the lasso, it's the angular lasso, I don't know what that's called. But it gives it this really nice cutout effect that I like. And so here I am just adding a little bit more color, just getting down the base colors first, adding a little bit of darkness to the limbs that are receding so that it's easier to tell which is which. I'm doing the same thing to the other model now. Always trying to keep in mind my color, and if my color feels right. Are my colors related correctly? Right now I'm just going for an analogous color scheme, just kind of keeping true to the original. And I'm just adding a very loose kind of shade that'll help me decide when I'm making the model where I'd like the shade to fall. Just a little bit more. The floofy tail is a little bit hard for me, but we'll see how it goes. Adding a little bit of details, just give a little bit more life to the character, and we'll be just about finished here. Alright guys, this illustration is almost done. I hope you'll join me for the rest of the tutorial. I hope to rig this character as well, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. See you next time.